Okay, so I actually got a question today that I read this morning. It's more like a series of comments than a question, but nonetheless very valuable. So I'm going to try to formulate all those comments into a question that I'm going to be answering. And it has to do with the relationship between your near signal, your SmO2, and VO2, so oxygen consumption. And traditionally, VO2 is a very important parameter. It's still used a lot today. There's value there, and how much oxygen you're consuming. And oxygen being important for bioenergetics, so it's an important parameter. And to understand how your SmO2, your muscle oxygen value, relates to VO2, we need to look at, well, what is VO2 anyways? And VO2 is, using the Fick equation, VO2 is a product of your cardiac output and your arteriovenous difference. And your cardiac output is basically a product of your heart rate, so how fast your heart beats, and your stroke volume, which is how strong each of those beats are to move blood through your blood vessels. And your arteriovenous difference is how much oxygen is getting put into your muscles, and then how much oxygen is leaving your muscles via the blood. And there's a difference there, so it gives you an information about how much oxygen is consumed. So basically, if you take cardiac output and arterial difference, you get a rate of blood flow and a rate of oxygen extraction, and you get a value of how much oxygen is consumed, which is your VO2 value. Now, if we think about that a little bit, we think about what your near signal is telling you in terms of consensus. What the information that's giving us is that it's giving us information about oxygen supply and demand directly in the muscle where it's being measured. And oxygen supply and demand, if we take a look at the Fick equation, is basically VO2 is oxygen supply and demand. It's your cardiac output, which is an oxygen supply parameter, and it's your arteriovenous difference, which is more of an oxygen extraction and utilization parameter. So you kind of have the same thing going on. You have an oxygen supply and demand relationship. Now, your NIRS device is going to be more on the arteriovenous difference side because it's measuring in the muscle, but that is obviously affected by how much blood is actually being moved in and how much oxygen is on that blood. So, as we can see, they're very closely related, and there's a good reason that the good arguments to be made that they are very closely related. Now, in order for us to understand what this actually means for an individual, for an athlete or a coach, I'm going to put an example up. And in this example, we're going to take a look at a pre and post test. It's a 5-on-5 test. And we're going to take a look at how VO2, their maximum VO2 value changes, which is often used as kind of an endurance fitness parameter. The higher your maximum VO2, the better conditioned you are. And we're going to take a look at a pre and post and look at how your SmO2 trends changed, your NIRS trends changed, and what that did to your maximum VO2. So if you look at the pre-test, we see it's a 5-on-5 test, and we see that at maximum intensity, so in the last step, we're getting to kind of like the 60% SmO2 value. So there's a lot of oxygen left to be extracted and utilized. And we're going to take a look at what this kind of a picture, what the resulting VO2 is and the resulting performance. So this person had a VO2 of 55.1 and a power output of wattage of 220. And then we did a post test about 6 months later. I'm going to take a look at that, and that resulted in this, where we see that there's actually a pretty big improvement, or pretty big change, let's call it a change, in the SmO2 value, so in the extraction and utilization of oxygen, which goes down to close to 30%. So we're looking at a 30% change there, which looks like we have much more oxygen extraction and utilization going on than before, which is good. That was also the goal of the training program, to try to improve that. And what we also see is that heart rate is actually generally higher as well. Now, I would assume, and so what's also the wattage steps aren't exactly the same, but side note. So it looks like if I look at this data, I would assume that VO2 is going to be higher. Better arterial venous difference, more oxygen extraction utilization when we look at SmO2. Heart rate's higher. I would assume a higher cardiac output, even though I don't know stroke volume. I want to take a look what the data actually is. And we see that VO2 went up to 59.2, which is about a 10% increase. It's pretty nice. And power goes up by 40 watts. It's about a 15% increase. It's also pretty nice. We were pretty happy with all that. And we see that the change in VO2 can be nicely explained by the data that we're presenting on the screen, by the muscle oxygenation data. Now, this is generally the case. It's not always the case because SmO2 isn't a quantified value. It's relative. It doesn't actually tell you how much oxygen is being extracted and utilized in the muscle that you're measuring. It's just a relative measure. This means it is possible that you have a higher it's showing reading a higher SmO2 value and your VO2 actually goes up because of the overall amount of blood and oxygen that's being pumped into the muscle becomes so much higher. So those cases do exist. I would say they're not as often, but those do happen, just to keep in mind. Nonetheless, your near signal, your SmO2 value, is pretty valuable on a day-to-day tracking and helping us think about what is going on with VO2. And it takes it away from having to do some kind of lab testing and annoying mask using. So there's definitely advantages there from a user perspective. I hope that answered the comments that I got. I hope that question was well formulated on my part. And thank you very much. And please send me some more questions. All right. Bye-bye.